years, I was fortunate enough to have a robotics program in my school district where we made robots from scratch, which led me to pursue a degree in mechanical engineering. I spent 2 years trying to enter the Cochran School of Engineering, just barely making it by in my classes, until I got to a point where I told myself, if I didn't do well in this next math class, I would need to seriously think about my path at UT. On the first day of that semester, the math professor said, I know this class is called Logic, Sets, and Functions, but all we're going to be doing in here is proofs. I was a bit dumbstruck after he said that, because I was never exposed to proofs in a single math class I took in my K-12 schooling. I remember an instance where my high school math teacher was flipping through our textbook, and when she saw the chapter on proofs, said, "Y'all learn this." After embarrassing myself in front of the class the next week when presenting one of the first homework problems, I decided it was time I looked for something else at UT. Luckily, I found a class at the exact same time, and Professor Alex Chavez was kind enough to squeeze me into music in Mexican America. I took more Mexican American studies classes after that, and I learned more things I was never exposed to in public school. I learned about how Mexicans living in Texas for years became U.S. citizens overnight after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, yet they were discriminated upon and treated as second-class human beings. One method used to steal land from Mexican Americans during that time was to report the landowner wasn't paying property taxes, when in fact they were most likely not even aware they had to pay property taxes on land their family had been living on for generations. Others were simply shot in their homes and called bandits, a racist explanation that justified the slaughter of countless innocents after the Mexican-American War. I learned about how the Texas public school system is structurally inequitable because we pay for schools using local property taxes. This leaves low-income areas, like where I came from, the Edgewood Independent School District, always at a disadvantage when it comes to funding, because they'll never be able to raise as much money as their counterparts in more affluent neighborhoods. I learned about my history and about my culture, and I started to flourish at UT. The reason these ethnic programs even exist, to teach us about the values of diversity, inclusion, and social justice, is because of a struggle to get them into the college curriculum. This struggle came at the end of the Civil Rights Movement, starting with the Third World Strike at San Francisco State University. In May of 1968, the university president fired teaching assistant George Murray, who was a graduate student in the English department and a member of the Black Panther Party. In protest, the Third World Liberation Front, which was a coalition of various student organizations, including the Black Student Union, the Latin American Students Organization, the Filipino American Students Organization, and El Renacimiento, a Mexican American student organization, went on strike and issued a set of non-negotiable demands, which included the creation of a School of Ethnic Studies and increased enrollment for minority students. After months of maintaining the strike, the students won the School of Ethnic Studies and the expansion of the Black Studies department on campus, which was the first one of its kind in the nation. This led to a fight for ethnic and identity studies across the country on hundreds of campuses, including the University of Texas. In May 1968, here on campus, the student group Afro-Americans for Black Liberation won a course on Afro-American culture and a lecture series on Afro-American history. In February 1969, the AABL issued a list of demands, which included the following: the creation of a Black Studies department, affirmative action in admissions and teaching staff, dismissal of the Board of Regents, an Ethnic Studies Center in East Austin, the removal of racist faculty and statues, and memorials for MLK and Malcolm X.
1968.
1969.
9.
Soon after, the Mexican American Student Organization and the AABL joined forces and demanded both an Afro-American Studies program and a Chicano Studies program. A few years later, in response to the university attempting to water down the ethnic studies, Director Paredes of Mexican American Studies created a specialized degree, which also included a Spanish language component. Despite resistance from the dean, James Roche, Director Paredes enrolled students into the program and began teaching classes. The struggle intensified in January 1972, when a student who was preparing to graduate was informed by a degree checker that a BA in Mexican American Studies didn't even exist. As the situation developed, the excuse was that Dean Roche's secretary lost the paperwork. This led to Director Paredes resigning because he felt there was no point in staying at the university if the tower wasn't going to wholeheartedly support the Mexican American Studies program. The controversy that was generated after the action of Paredes' resignation increased support for the center, and soon after, students were able to graduate with that degree. Now, we organized this panel tonight not only to inform you about the struggles that led to the establishment of these centers, but to tell you that our centers and departments are reduced funding from the Texas legislature, Dean Randy Deal created the Academic Planning and Advisory Committee, which was tasked to cut $1 million from the ethnic and identity study centers at UT. Students and faculty members were outraged. Well, also, just to let you show you the cuts, one thing that's really interesting was for the European studies, out of everyone, they got an increase in funding. So, students were outraged. They organized. They held teach-ins. They had rallies and protests, and they testified at the Capitol during the legislative session. Well, it was the first time that many of us cut our teeth in activism. The administration knew very well how to deal with critical students. One tactic Dean Deal and other admins often used was saying, these are only recommendations, or there's nothing set in stone. What this does, though, is diffuse student organizing, because it makes the issue lose its urgency in the hopes that the administration can wait until summer or winter break when student activity drops. The biggest myth that they used against us was the budget crisis. Now, by a show of hands, how many people here know how much funding we receive from the state of Texas? What's the percent of funding that we get from Texas? 13.3%, at least the last time I checked, or like the last legislative session. Now, who here knows how much the UT system's endowment is? Anybody know what the endowment is?
Billions.
There's this big pool. We have this big pool of money spread across the entire UT system. That's like from oil and natural gas reserves. Right now, from their last report, it's over $17 billion. The point I'm trying to make is that there is no budget crisis. We have enough money sitting on hand to get us through hard times. Any talk about needing to increase efficiency, reduce costs, privatize, is all rhetoric used to justify less services for students and more work for the staff and faculty that are lucky enough to survive the rounds of terminations. There's no excuse for putting people's livelihoods in danger and creating a culture of fear on campus, not knowing if your department or job is next on the chopping block. Now, I'll also admit, the long-term solution is not to cannibalize our budget. We need the state of Texas to invest in education. And in order to do that, our lawmakers need to generate revenue in the state. Now, I was there last session, and I saw President Powers at those committee meetings, but he wasn't championing for us. He used the same kind of neoliberal rhetoric that justifies austerity on campus. He didn't take the muzzle off. He didn't fight for us. Now, some might say that's too risky for him. He has to play it safe because the UT regents can fire him. But you know what? He gets paid over $600,000 a year to advocate for us. He's not taking any risk. You know what's risky? Taking out loans that we have to use to pay for our higher education in a state that doesn't have the jobs that are going to give us the money that we need to pay back our student loan debt. He's going to be fine. We're going to be a generation in debt. The students organizing 2 years ago had an effect on the cuts. At the end of the spring 2011 semester, Dean Deal reproportioned the cuts and gave a reduced cut to African American and Mexican American studies because they had the most numerous and most vocal students, but gave a higher cut to Asian American studies. This was 2 years ago, but just this month, the National Association of Scholars released a study titled Recasting History, Our Race, Class, and Gender Dominating American History. In the study, they targeted UT and Texas A&M history courses and assigned readings. According to their study, 78% of the UT faculty they surveyed were high assigners of race, class, and gender readings. And they recommend we hire faculty with a more broader research interest. And get back to teaching core documents like, and I quote, the Mayflower Compact or Lincoln's Second Inaugural Address. They also think we need to learn more about the great white men of history, like, and I quote, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas A. Edison, the Wright brothers, or the scientists of the Manhattan Project. Just a few days ago, Richard Pells, a professor of history emeritus at UT, wrote an article supporting the study in which he writes, the obsession with social history originated in the 1960s, inspired by then graduate students, the young historians who wanted to concentrate on groups and classes that had been traditionally oppressed and whose history had been overlooked. For them, American history was too elitist. It needed instead to be taught and written about from the bottom up. Nevertheless, what has developed at the University of Texas over the past 20 years is an almost oppressive orthodoxy and a lack of intellectual diversity among the history faculty. Now, he's describing the tail end of the civil rights movement that I mentioned before, when students began fighting to get ethnic studies into the curriculum. But it doesn't sound like he's much of an advocate for ethnic studies. Now, this is the first step of an Arizona kind of ban on ethnic studies here in Texas. Groups like the conservative think tank Texas Public Policy Foundation, which have a history of meddling in higher education and almost all other institutions in the state, are lobbying our legislatures at the Capitol. They have the wealth and the ears of the party in power, and they'll be pointing to this study for years to come. Put this in context with the racially themed parties, the bleach bombs of last semester, with the Fisher versus UT case, and it's easy to see that the fight for ethnic studies is more important now than it ever was. We need these departments and centers to counter the attempts of groups like NAS and TPPF, which are trying to advance a narrow view of history that represents America as a great nation built by white men. We need them to counter the false narratives, some of which are perpetuated by our own professors. For example, just a few months ago, UT Law professor Lucian said on a radio interview with the BBC that low academic performance among blacks and Latinos is caused by being raised by a single parent, usually female, uneducated, and without a lot of money. Raj's statements are worse than wrong. They end up providing a racist explanation rooted in false ideas about cultural inferiority. Rooted in false ideas about cultural inferiority for unequal educational outcomes. In reality, these outcomes are tending the consequence of the many social and material barriers that blacks and brown people encounter in America. His shallow explanations for racial inequality wouldn't pass muster in any ethnic studies class, so why is he allowed to perpetuate these ideas to students? To add insult to injury, last semester the UT Regents, the 9 unappointed businessmen and women who run the entire UT system, approved $100 million from the $17 billion endowment to remodel their offices. Raise your hand if you've been to the Regents office. Let me tell you, they're really nice. They got nice posh chairs, they have stained wood walls, and a big old University of Texas seal overlooking the whole thing. They always find money for their pet projects or luxuries, but we never get a dime to put towards our education. Now, some of you might think this is a pretty dismal situation. How do we save our centers? I have a proposal. Along with the $100 million that the Regents said they approved, they also stated in one of their news releases that in doing this they're going to get a net savings of $60 to $240 million, and they're going to put Chancellor Segoa in charge of using this money towards new student success initiatives. I say we don't need new student success initiatives. Fund the programs and centers that desperately need funding now. 2 years ago, $1 million was cut from 16 ethnic and identity study centers and departments. So let's demand $1 million for each department and center, totaling $16 million. If we're going to have $60 to $240 million in surplus money, then let's put it towards our education, not neoliberal initiatives. What better way to arm our centers for the political battles down the road than by securing the material resources we need, so that way we can rehire professors, give scholarships to students, expand academic programs, run programs to benefit communities of color on the east side. We can start this off by writing an open letter to Dean Dill, who first initiated these cuts, and demand him to ask the money for us. We can table to recruit more students to our cause and convince organizations that we're a part of to sign on to this open letter as well. This is only one idea. We have to be 10 times smarter and 10 times more creative than the forces that we're up against, because they have monopolies on wealth and power, which we can only overcome if we work cooperatively, just like the Afro-Americans for Black Liberation and the Mexican-American Student Organization did on campus years before. The time is now to reclaim UT for the students, faculty, and workers who learn and labor in the institution. We can run this university and decide how to use our resources far better than the disconnected administrators who want to now consolidate their power in a brand new building. A struggle for racial